In 2014, I learned about an upcoming game called Destiny. It was the latest title from developer Bungie, who at the time was primarily known for the Halo franchise. A blend of sci-fi, fantasy, FPS, and MMORPG, Destiny was unlike any game I had played before. I had played and enjoyed games in all of those genres before, so Destiny piqued my interest. A lifelong astronomy buff, I was especially excited by the game's setting in an alternate, future version of our solar system. After watching gameplay of the beta, I decided to purchase the Destiny Glacier White PS4 bundle, as I didn't yet have an 8th generation console in 2014. It's still the PS4 that I have today and I'm using to make this video. When the game arrived on September 9th, 2014, I rushed home from school and quickly set up my new PS4 so that I could play Destiny. In 2014, I loved Destiny's gameplay but felt let down by the story. I played Destiny for the next month or two and really badly wanted to do the Vault of Glass raid, but I didn't have any friends who played Destiny, so my interest in the game eventually faded. Jaded by Destiny's somewhat disappointing launch, I wrote off the franchise and wouldn't return until October 2019, when Destiny 2 was re-released as a free-to-play title on Steam. I had heard that Destiny had improved in the intervening 5 years, so I decided to try the free-to-play version of Destiny 2, A New Light. In 2019, A New Light included all of the content released during the game's first year. I found the New Light experience convoluted, as Destiny 2 did a poor job of presenting the available content in an easy-to-navigate manner. Upon starting A New Light, Destiny 2 immediately presented me with dozens of quests in the Pursuits tab and didn't provide a streamlined order, which was very overwhelming. Not being knowledgeable about the franchise at that point, I wasn't sure where to start. I spent several hours exploring patrol locations before I figured out how to access the 3 free campaigns and accidentally play them out of order. The whole experience was confusing and poorly designed, but I was determined to figure out Destiny 2 as I had a few friends who played the game and I wanted to get caught up so I could play with them. I enjoyed the Destiny 2 Year 1 campaigns much more than the vanilla Destiny campaign and found the gameplay even better. After spending about 80 hours in Destiny 2, exhausting most of the free-to-play story content, I asked some of those friends to help me learn the game's first raid, Leviathan. Unfortunately, those friends weren't interested in helping A New Light learn the raid, so we never ended up playing Destiny together. In their defense, we had been growing apart for a while at that point, and shortly after 2019, the friendships faded away completely. Dejected, I gave up on Destiny 2, deciding not to buy Shadowkeep or Forsaken because I again lacked a fireteam to play endgame content. In August of 2022, I picked up Destiny 2 for the second time, as I now had a group of friends who were playing the game, several of whom were, like me, returning to the franchise after years away. With the help of experienced friends, I navigated the now even more convoluted New Light experience, which had become even worse after the sunsetting of most Year 1 and Year 2 content. Finally having a consistent fireteam to play with, I quickly purchased all of the available expansions and got into endgame content like raids, dungeons, and Grandmaster Nightfalls. I even achieved my goal from 8 years earlier, completing Destiny 2's version of the Vault of Glass raid. Over the following 6 months, I put more than 700 hours into the game, and for the first time in 8 years found myself interested in revisiting Destiny 1. I decided to make a completely new character and play through all of the story content the game has to offer, including expansions I had never played before. This video will document my experience. Because I will be reviewing the story and gameplay of Destiny and all of its expansions, there will be spoilers for all of that content and potentially some of Destiny 2. You have been warned. We begin with the content that pushed me away 8 years ago, the 20-mission Black Garden campaign. Before now, I hadn't realized that I had nostalgia for Destiny 1, but apparently I do. I got chills as I watched the opening cutscene. The player is quickly introduced to the Destiny universe as they witness humanity's first encounter with a mysterious orb called the Traveler. The speaker narrates the cutscene, explaining that the Traveler imbued humanity with the power of light to fight against its enemy, the darkness. Calling the good faction the light and the evil faction the darkness is a bit cliche, but thankfully the franchise has slowly moved away from this awkward dichotomy in recent years. The Ares mission cutscene is a fantastic introduction to the world of Destiny, and I think it serves as the highlight of the Black Garden campaign. It's unfortunate that the story peaks so early and fails to explore the impending threat of the darkness in any meaningful way. The threat is left vague and uninteresting, as I need more than mysterious hints about the collapse at the end of the Golden Age to understand why I should fear the darkness. In my first few hours of the vanilla campaign, I noticed that the story was paper thin. Every mission was basically about finding a new game mechanic. Ghost resurrected me from the dead, and I found my first weapon, a Kvostov auto rifle, using it to fight the Fallen. Next, I found a ship to take me to the last city, where I explored humanity's last safe refuge. I returned to the Cosmodrome to fight the Fallen, then obtained special and power weapons plus a Sparrow, and eventually was introduced to the Hive. These opening missions are designed excellently from a gameplay perspective, as they slowly introduce the player to each gameplay system, allowing you to learn each system individually without getting overwhelmed. However, the story justification behind the missions is very lacking. I wasn't told why I was fighting the Fallen and the Hive. I didn't learn very much about the factions or why they needed to be defeated. Introducing the Hive and the Cosmodrome served as the setup for the next portion of the story, which took place on the moon. At the urging of the speaker, I fought the Hive on the moon and discovered a Hive ritual that was draining the Traveler of its light energy. Not that the game properly set that up or explained what the consequences of the ritual's completion would have been, though. Finally, about halfway into the story content, right as I was about to enter the ritual to stop the Hive, the story finally got started. A mysterious exo named the Stranger contacted me and told me if I stopped the Hive that I should find her and help her fight the Vex on Venus and destroy something called the Black Garden. Destiny doesn't explain why the Black Garden needs to be destroyed or why I should even trust the exo Stranger in the first place. The line, "I don't have time to explain why I don't have time to explain," makes this obvious. It feels as if the writers are tacitly admitting that they ran out of time to complete the story of the game, something which might actually have happened. More on that later. At the Stranger's insistence, I fought the Vex on Venus, but wasn't able to figure out where the Black Garden actually was. I requested information from the Awoken in the Reef, who requested I bring them the head of a Gate Lord to get into the Black Garden. I surprised them by returning with what they thought would be impossible to acquire, so they directed me to Mars, where I fought through Cabal forces to reach the entrance to the Black Garden. Like the Fallen and the Hive before them, the narrative also fails to explain why I should be fighting the Vex or Cabal. This is particularly a problem with the Cabal, as it seems we have a similar goal. During the Mars missions, it becomes apparent that the Cabal are trying to contain the Vex incursions on the planet, which is exactly what I'm trying to do by destroying the Black Garden. If we have similar goals, it might make sense for us to join forces, but the game doesn't even consider this option. Instead, I mindlessly fought the Cabal and Vex, and eventually, in the words of Ghost, killed a god. With the Black Garden destroyed, the story wraps up. Don't get me wrong, Destiny's vanilla campaign was visually impressive for a 2014 console release, especially the Black Garden mission, but the storytelling makes the visuals fall flat, as the player is never really given a reason to care. Both the Black Garden and the Traveler being drained of light both seem to come out of nowhere as a concept, and left me a little bit confused. I've played Beyond Light, so I'm aware of the future lore justification for the Exo Stranger telling me to destroy the Black Garden, but I don't think it's fair to judge the story with lore that wasn't provided to the player until more than 6 years after they first destroyed the Black Heart. Even knowing that justification, I still don't quite understand the Black Heart's connection to the darkness and how it was impacting the Traveler in the vanilla campaign. The Black Garden just isn't properly set up within the game and just appears out of nowhere halfway through the campaign. The main conflict of the campaign should have been spelled out in the first few missions, giving the game a narrative momentum from the beginning. This issue could have been remedied by having the player encounter the Vex in the Cosmodrome missions and establish their connection to the darkness much more clearly. Then we could have seen the effects of the Traveler being visibly weakened and witnessed its decline to emphasize why the darkness must be defeated. As is, it's difficult to understand the Traveler's abilities, as it appears solely as a stationary mysterious orb in the sky that never changes in Destiny 1. It doesn't change much in Destiny 2 either, but at least the Red War conveyed a similar idea by showing the player the effects of losing the Traveler's light, thus making the effects immediately apparent. I'm sure that the Grimoire cards explain some of the story behind the Black Garden, however, I shouldn't have to read the Grimoire cards to make me care about finishing the mission. It's a major failure of the vanilla campaign that I went into the final story mission not understanding the consequences of failure. In the vanilla campaign, nearly every voice actor delivers their lines in a tone that's best described as dispassionate. This makes the characters boring to listen to and fails to provide meaningful characterization. Without interesting characters, it's hard to become invested in a story. Ironically, the most interesting character is Ghost, the little pocket-sized robot that guides the Guardian through most of their journey. However, the Ghost audio currently in the game isn't actually the performance Destiny shipped with. Originally, Ghost was voiced by Peter Dinklage, the actor most famous for his role as Tyrion Lannister in Game of Thrones. In 2014, Dinklage was widely criticized for his performance being flat and emotionless, which likely led to Bungie replacing Dinklage with prolific voice actor Nolan North. If you've played any AAA game in the last 10 to 15 years, you've likely heard a character voiced by North. It's hard to deny that North gives a better performance than Dinklage, but I don't think it's actually Dinklage's fault. I don't think anyone who's seen Game of Thrones would dispute that Dinklage can act when provided with the right material. Pretty much every other character in the vanilla Destiny campaign sounds flat and emotionless, which I don't think is a coincidence. Zavala is played by Lance Reddick, another HBO prestige drama veteran, from his role as Cedric Daniels in The Wire. He's another very talented actor who sounds very subdued and passionless in his delivery. Having also played future Destiny campaigns, I know that Reddick is capable of delivering a solid performance as Zavala. This is obviously conjecture, but having most of the characters sound similar and flat seems like a creative choice made by someone at Bungie, likely whoever was working with the actors while they were recording their lines, rather than the fault of any particular actor. The voice actor situation clearly improves in the post-launch content, as the performances in the expansions feel significantly more vibrant and emotional. The only characters in the vanilla campaign that I found interesting were Mara and Uldren Sov, the Awoken Queen and her brother. They're still quite subdued, but I get the impression that it's because they view the Guardian with contempt. Even though I was playing as an Awoken woman, the Queen and her brother treated me as an outsider rather than a member of their species. I'm actually not quite sure what the status of Awoken Guardians is compared to the rest of the Awoken. I'm not sure if it's explored in content that I haven't consumed, but it feels like a major oversight. The relationship between Awoken Guardians and the Awoken state is the sort of thing that absolutely should have been clarified to properly establish the world and its inhabitants. Many of the problems in the Black Garden campaign are likely explained by the events behind the scenes at Bungie during the final years of Destiny's development. We have some insight into the development of Destiny's story from reporting in a Jason Schreier Kotaku article called The Messy True Story Behind the Launch of Destiny, published in 2015. Everything I'm going to say about the development of Destiny in this video is based on allegations Schreier heard from developers who are not authorized to speak publicly by Bungie, so take them with a dose of skepticism. Allegedly, Bungie had a story that was mostly complete in the summer of 2013. A supercut of all of the game's cutscenes was shown to management, who disliked what they saw. Reports on the quality of the writing from people who have actually seen the supercut are mixed, but we do know that the story was scrapped and had to be rewritten in the last year of development, which is very late for a AAA game. Because portions of gameplay content were already in production, the people responsible for rewriting the story had to find a way to incorporate those existing assets into a new story. It's like completely rewriting the script of a movie from the ground up after you've already shot more than half of its scenes. This is something that's occasionally done, but usually takes a toll on the coherence and quality of the final product. Based on the final product, I find the allegations credible, as the vanilla story is vague, unfocused, and lacks depth. I don't know if the original version would have been any good, but it probably would have been more coherent. I'd personally prefer a coherent story that's poorly written over one assembled last minute that lacks personality and depth, but that's my opinion. One of Destiny 1's major storyline problems is the way Grimoire Cards work. If you're unaware, Grimoire Cards were Destiny 1's version of the Lore tab, a way for the player to read the world building of Destiny. They're earned by playing the game, but aren't viewable in the actual game. To read them, you have to log into your Bungie account on their website. I don't know why they don't feature in the actual game, but this feels like a major oversight. Being able to read the lore in-game might have served as a band-aid solution for the unfocused writing of the campaign. I'm not saying it's a good solution, as I personally need the main story to feature compelling characters and narrative stakes for me to be interested in reading the lore, but it might have helped people who were confused. I don't know what it would have cost to implement Grimoire card functionality in-game, however, countless other games have featured lore tabs without issue. An excellent example comes from another sci-fi fantasy game, BioShock, which released in 2007 and featured a radio diary system with voice-acted audio clips explaining the game's lore. Imagine if Destiny 1 had featured Grimoire cards with optional narration by some of the game's characters. It would have gone a long way to fixing the shortcomings of the vanilla campaign. While I still find myself disliking the vanilla story, I have a new appreciation for the gameplay. Destiny demonstrates how to masterfully introduce the player to its gameplay loop, something Destiny 2's new light experience utterly fails at. I appreciate the way loot is slowly doled out to new players in a measured fashion. You start with white common gear. Most gear you get in the early hours of the campaign will be common, but eventually you'll start seeing green engrams drop, which contain uncommon gear. Each time I got new green gear, I was excited as green gear features random upgradable perks. Eventually, in the latter half of the campaign, I started to see blue rare loot, and finally, at the end, I received my first purple legendary weapon, the Stranger's Pulse Rifle. While playing post-campaign content and the following DLCs, most of my loot still was blue with the occasional purple. This is how a functioning loot rarity system should work, but Destiny 2's system features more than 5 years of loot creep, leading to white and green gear ceasing to exist in the modern game, blue gear becoming the new whites, purple gear becoming the new greens, and yellow exotic gear feeling more like the new legendary gear. It's a bit ironic that Destiny 2 still labels blues as rare when they're extremely common and widely seen as trash in the modern version of Destiny 2. This is editing Victoria here. I just want to interject for a moment to say that I find it hilarious that I wrote this script literally days before Bungie announced that they were going to be removing blue loot drops after players reached the power cap in Destiny 2. So now the loot pool is even less diverse. There's pretty much only legendary gear once you reach the soft cap. This was a necessary change because blues kind of just are trash that overflows the inventory space in Destiny 2, but it is a bit of a problem to only have 2 levels of rarity of loot in a looter shooter. There isn't an easy system for resetting the loot pool in Destiny 2, and I'm certainly not going to attempt to solve that problem in a review of Destiny 1, but I just want to point out how refreshing it felt to have a functional loot rarity progression system. Another system I find refreshing is Destiny 1's version of subclasses. The game has always featured the 3 primary classes of Warlock, Titan, and Hunter, but the functionality of the elemental subclasses has changed significantly over the last 8 years. Destiny 1 uses a simple system where you gradually unlock new subclass features as you play each subclass. The XP required to unlock each new feature is a bit high, as unlocking new abilities feels a bit slower than it probably should. I like the simplicity of the system's graphical user interface, simply showing a grid of features you can choose from for each portion of the subclass. The ability evolution in Destiny 2 has improved the gameplay of each subclass, but the user interface wasn't broken in Destiny 1 and didn't need to be fixed in Destiny 2. The aspect and fragment system for the 3.0 subclasses introduced in Beyond Light for Stasis and added to the Light subclasses in Witch Queen is unnecessarily convoluted. To get Stasis, you have to to complete the campaign of Beyond Light, complete a long post-campaign quest, and then do a ridiculous number of weekly bounties from the Exo Stranger to obtain every stasis aspect and fragment. Light 3.0 subclasses are a little more straightforward, but you still need to complete a quest and then subsequently spend a metric ton of Glimmer to purchase all of the required options for each class. The old progression of simply needing to gain XP while using each class to get more features was well designed in the first place. It just needed to be sped up a little bit to be perfected. Destiny 1 is also noticeably more challenging than Destiny 2. This mostly stems from gradual power creep caused by the introduction of new abilities and features over the course of 8 years. Particularly class abilities, which are not present in Destiny 1 and were introduced in Destiny 2, have had a large effect on the sandbox. Their absence was very notable to me. I primarily play Warlock, so I missed being able to drop a healing rift every time my health got low. I found myself hiding behind cover a lot more than I would in Destiny 2 outside of endgame content. The added difficulty was a breath of fresh air in most content, although I did find some bosses, particularly normal difficulty strike bosses, to have a bit too much health for my taste. This partially stems from the lack of a player population for Destiny 1 in 2023, causing most of my strike experiences to be solo. Most strike bosses are designed to be challenging for 3 players, which makes them tedious bullet sponges for someone forced to solo a strike because they can't find 2 other players to populate their match. Even 10 levels over the recommended power for strikes, I was still having this problem. This isn't Bungie's fault though, as strikes were not intended to be a solo experience. Overall, my opinion on the base version of Destiny hasn't changed significantly. I still believe that the gameplay is fantastic, but vanilla Destiny 1 lacks a compelling story that could elevate it to one of the greatest games of all time. Destiny's first expansion, The Dark Below, released on December 9th, 2014. It features 2 new story missions, 2 new strikes, and a new raid. The questline reuses 2 vanilla campaign missions to serve as the introduction to the new missions. The quest focuses on the Hive on the moon, who are trying to perform a ritual to summon an ascendant hive named Crota. The Dark Below barely has any story, and it feels like it's over before it begins. The only good addition is the introduction of Eris Morn, a former guardian who became half hive after she became stranded on the moon. She always has an overly serious doom and gloom affect, which I find extremely endearing. She's always felt very neurodivergent coded, which I can relate to as an autistic person. I don't really have much to say about The Dark Below because there isn't much to talk about. The story is far too small to overcome the shortcomings inherent to the vanilla campaign. Destiny's second expansion, House of Wolves, released on May 19th, 2015. It features 4 new story missions, 1 new strike, and an arena mode called Prison of Elders. House of Wolves is where I first noticed the tone starting to shift away from vanilla. House of Wolves introduced a new social space in the Reef called the Vestian Outpost, which is where the player can interface with new factions, including the Awoken and their fallen allies. The principal allies featured in the expansion are Petra, an Awoken warrior who serves the Queen, and Varix, an Elixni who is allied with the Awoken. Like Eris, both characters have strong characterizations. Petra is focused on fighting enemy factions of the Fallen and expresses bloodlust, constantly complaining about not being able to get her hands dirty. The performance feels very lively and is a very welcome change in tone, even if the bloodlust is a little bit questionable sometimes. Varix is a somewhat shifty Elixni who always seems to be smirking as he talks to you. I get the vibe that I shouldn't trust him completely. In House of Wolves, Varix and Petra help the player hunt down a fallen Kel named Skolas, who has named himself Kel of Kells, a prophesized Elixni warrior who can unite all of the houses under one banner. We finally receive necessary backstory on the Elixni. The player is told that the last time multiple houses were united against the Guardians was during the Battle of Twilight Gap, in which the Fallen nearly took the city. This tiny bit of lore, only delivered in a single line of dialogue, is very helpful to establish narrative stakes, something that the prior campaigns desperately lacked. House of Wolves feels like a step in the right direction, but it's also fairly short, as I was surprised by how quickly Skolas was dealt with. One thing I'd like to note about House of Wolves is the mission Wolves Gambit, which features a fallen raid on the Vault of Glass. It takes place inside the location of the raid and features the Oracle mechanics. I appreciated how this mission demonstrated that the Guardians weren't the only ones who saw the power of the Vault of Glass and have attempted to harness it for themselves. This goes a long way to characterize the House of Wolves in an interesting manner. House of Wolves doesn't feature a new raid, but it does add replayable endgame content with Prison of Elders, a round-based PvE experience. During the first 4 rounds, the player survives 3 waves of enemies per round, and then round 5 is a boss fight. The prison felt like a nice change of pace, as I had naturally fallen into the rhythm of campaigns and strikes by this point. Narratively, the Prison of Elders is a reef prison used to hold enemies of the Awoken, with Varric serving as the warden. I appreciate this concept as it shows that we don't always murder enemies of the city in cold blood. As a PvE horde mode aficionado, I wish there was a version of Prison of Elders that featured endless waves of increasing difficulty. It would have added significant replayability to the mode, which is a little lacking after you've beaten every possible wave type on the harder difficulties. Before playing The Taken King, I had heard a lot about it. It's frequently referred to as the expansion that saved the Destiny franchise, so my expectations were pretty high. Nevertheless, I was impressed. The Taken King features more story content than all of vanilla Destiny. There are 26 new story missions, 4 new strikes, a new enemy faction called the Taken, a new patrol zone that takes place on a hive ship called the Dreadnought that's crashed into Saturn's rings, a new raid, and a new version of Prison of Elders called Challenge of Elders. By this point, I had forgotten that Destiny launched with only 2 subclasses per class. Warlock had Void and Solar, Hunter had Arc and Solar, and Titan had Void and Arc. The Taken King introduced the 3rd element for each class: Arc Warlocks, Void Hunters, and Solar Titans. I've been a Warlock main since I started playing Destiny 1. There's something about being a space magician that's always appealed to me. During my playthroughs of each campaign, I played with a brand new Warlock, which meant when I got to the Taken King, I had to complete the 2 mission questline which unlocks the Arc subclass. Each class has a unique 2 mission questline for their new subclass, which means if you only play one class, the Taken King only actually has 22 new missions. I thoroughly enjoyed the mission to Mars's underground city to steal Arc energy from the Vex. I especially love the game design choice to let the player try out the new subclass and super by killing waves of enemies immediately after unlocking it. I also appreciated that the base abilities of melee, grenade, and super were unlocked immediately, unlike the vanilla subclasses which had to be slowly unlocked via XP. This is a good change because most players getting their 2nd or 3rd subclass will already have an understanding of the subclass system and shouldn't need to start from scratch to unlock each ability piecemeal. The piecemeal system made my early Solar gameplay a bit frustrating because I had to deliberately limit my gameplay to unlock the base Solar abilities. The Taken King's main campaign starts with an incredible cutscene on par with the introduction to vanilla Destiny. The cutscene opens with a contemplative monologue delivered by Ghost, explaining the creation of Ghost during the death of the Traveler, and how Ghost searched for hundreds of years to find the right guardian. This monologue masterfully introduces the primary theme of the Taken King, which is the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. This is exactly the kind of writing sorely lacking in the Black Garden campaign. To me, its inclusion here seems like a tacit admission by the writers that they didn't effectively communicate the story during the first year of Destiny. It really feels like something that the Black Garden campaign should have opened with. The music is soft and sensitive and pairs excellently with Nolan North's performance as Ghost. The Nolan North version of Ghost is far superior to the Dinklage version, however the comparison is unfair as Dinklebot was saddled with poor writing. According to Bungie, the reason Dinklage was completely replaced was a combination of availability and being impressed with North's performance. While we won't ever know for sure what went on behind the scenes prompting recasting, casting and deleting all of Dinklage's lines from the game, it's hard to deny that North's Ghost performance is excellent. After Ghost's monologue, the tone of the cutscene changes. The music gets darker, and Mara Sov starts talking about her birth as we watch the Awoken fleet fight a Hive fleet in the orbit of Saturn. The tonal shift feels appropriate for Mara's character, as lore nerds will know her somewhat sinister role in the creation of the Awoken. However, you don't need to understand Mara's lore to understand that she's a somewhat pompous and enigmatic queen based on her role in the vanilla campaign. Mara explains the reasoning for the battle as a fight for freedom and Awoken sovereignty in the face of an invader claiming to be king of the solar system. The monologue cuts out as the music reaches peak intensity and the Awoken cast a spell that allows Mara Sov to summon massive energy beams to attack the capital ship of the Hive fleet. The music makes this feel epic. In general, the soundtrack of the Destiny games has always been phenomenal, even from the very beginning of the franchise. The attack succeeds in killing part of the Hive fleet, but fails to take out the Dreadnought. The Awoken are spent, and we see Oryx the Taken King fire a massive beam of energy, disrupting Saturn's rings and destroying the Awoken fleet. Mara provides Oryx's motivation by referencing the events of the Crota's End raid, where Guardians killed Oryx's son. Oryx has arrived to seek revenge upon the entire solar system. Mara says that the Awoken have played their part, and now it's time for the Guardian to play theirs. This establishes Mara's characterization as a master planner who treats the solar system like a chessboard where she's trying to enact her endgame against her enemies. This cutscene blows everything from the vanilla campaign out of the water with its complexity and efficiency at conveying exposition without boring the player. What I want to know is where all the people who created this cutscene were during the development of the vanilla campaign's story. It's a somewhat rhetorical question, as we know from the Kotaku article that the team who developed The Taken King was already working on this expansion when the vanilla campaign was rebooted in 2013. Likely the reason the quality is so divergent is the segmentation of those teams and the 1-year time delay between the two releases, allowing the development team to make tweaks to content in response to player feedback. The Taken King campaign is substantially longer than either of the two previous expansions, but is still significantly shorter than the vanilla campaign. It's 8 missions long and took me about 3.5 hours to complete. The first mission, The Coming War, features the Guardian investigating a Cabal transmission on Phobos. Zavala worries the transmission signals a full-scale invasion of the solar system by the Cabal. However, the player finds the Cabal dead, having been killed by another faction. Instead, the player is suddenly ambushed by an apparition of Oryx, who tells the Guardian to submit to him. Immediately, Oryx summons the Taken to attack the player. The Coming War serves as the perfect introduction to Destiny's 5th enemy faction, the Taken. Enemies from the 4 other major enemy factions who've been corrupted by Oryx and his darkness, bent to his will. The Taken are the Destiny universe's version of zombies, slave to the will of Oryx, their necromancer. It's a horrifying concept that's introduced in a shocking and brilliant manner. I wish I hadn't known about the Taken going into the Taken King because the reveal is brilliant. Throughout the rest of the level and subsequently the campaign, we see the Cabal fighting the Taken, showing that once again the Guardians and Cabal have a common enemy. After the player escapes Phobos, another cutscene plays that shows a horde of Taken Cabal bowing to Oryx. This further establishes that Oryx is the major threat because he controls the Taken forces. Oryx teleports back to the Dreadnought, where his advisor says that the leaders belong to Oryx and that the rest of the Cabal await execution. Oryx replies, "No, I will take them all." This efficiently sets up the stakes for the campaign. If Oryx wins, he will take every living being in the solar system and use the darkness to corrupt them and bend them to his will. It's incredibly refreshing after the vanilla campaign to see clear stakes established for the main antagonist right away. Oryx feels like a threat for the entirety of the expansion, as he should. The cutscene makes a brilliant transition by crossfading from a wide shot of the Dreadnought to a projection of it during a Vanguard meeting. The Vanguard in Last City didn't feel super involved in the story of vanilla Destiny, so the choice to make them an active force in this story is appreciated. We see a meeting where Ikora, Cade, Zavala, and Eris react to the events of the Awoken battle, tying the events of the opening cutscene into the mission. This helps establish that the battle above Saturn occurred roughly at the same time time as the first mission of the campaign, and the Vanguard learned about it after the player completed their mission on Phobos, explaining why Vanguard intelligence was lacking on that mission. I love the subtle ways these cutscenes form a narrative spanning the whole solar system. The Vanguard decides that the best way to counter Oryx is to send a Guardian to the Dreadnought, so Cade decides to take matters into his own hands, enlisting the Guardian to recover a cloaking device that they can use to sneak aboard the Dreadnought. Once aboard, the player discovers a Cabal ship that has crashed into the Dreadnought, forming a beachhead for retaliation against Oryx's Hive and Taken forces. Again, this leaves me a bit frustrated by the Cabal's general lack of development compared to the other 4 enemy factions in Destiny 1. The Taken King even points out that we have a common enemy with the title of the 4th mission, Enemy of My Enemy. However, Zavala tells the player to ignore the old saying that the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and fight the Cabal to steal the intelligence they have on Oryx. This is another situation where a temporary alliance with the Cabal to fight Oryx would be beneficial to both parties, but the game completely misses the opportunity. If the Cabal had a strong characterization in Destiny 1 like they do in Destiny 2, I could forgive this oversight. However, it feels almost like the writers are trying to lampshade the potential alliance here, but in a way that only serves to call attention to the issue rather than diffuse it. The Guardian uses the intelligence to try to enter the Ascendant realm where Oryx is located, but they're unable to travel through, as in the words of Eris Morn, only an Ascendant Hive can enter. This prompts a mission where the Guardian steals a vessel from an Ascendant Hive, which is followed by my favorite mission in the whole campaign. In a rare deviation from Destiny's run and gun style, the player is sent on a stealth mission where they must sneak past various Ascendant Hive to gain entry to Crota's funeral, where they literally steal his soul from his coffin. The concept is almost comical, but executed with fun stealth gameplay. Immediately after stealing Crota's soul, the Guardian is spotted and must fight through waves of Hive until Eris uses Hive magic to rescue them. I absolutely loved the stealth portion because it feels very different from normal Destiny gameplay. The part where I got caught wasn't as intense as it probably should be, as I tried to escape but realized that I couldn't leave the area before Eris rescued me. This diffused the tension a little bit. After obtaining more stealth tech so that Oryx can't track the Guardian's movements, the final mission is essentially a boss fight where the player fights Oryx. The boss fight felt slightly anticlimactic, as through no fault of my own, I was accidentally a couple levels above the mission, so it was a bit easier than it seemed like killing Oryx should have been. The fight was still well designed and engaging, it was just a little too easy to commit regicide. These downsides are overcome by the massive amount of post-campaign content available. There are 12 additional story missions that are part of 8 quest lines. These can mostly be played in any order and add a massive sense of scale to the Taken King. 4 of the quest lines are given the title The Taken War and an additional subtitle. I love this format because it gives the feeling of a massive conflict spanning the entire solar system and actually feels like a war. The Taken King smartly avoids the fantasy trope of the death of the enemy commander ending the entire war. Instead, we see a slightly more realistic situation where Hive and Taken forces continue to fight on after their leader is gone, and the vacuum left by Oryx creates an opportunity for other players in the conflict to make place for power. One such quest follows the House of Wolves, acting as a sequel to the second expansion. The leaderless House of Wolves attack weakened Cabal forces on Mars in an attempt to take over the planet, but are stopped by the Guardian, who's working on intelligence from Varix. These missions are all fairly short and lack a lot of substance, but they do serve as a coda to the previous expansion, showing that the House would absolutely take advantage of the greater war for personal gain, which feels very in character. It also helps aid the larger theme of wars being larger than a single leader that plays out in the post-campaign content. A similar quest line that focuses on the Cabal acts as the setup for the Red War, the base campaign of Destiny 2. Cabal forces incur heavy losses and send a distress signal to the greater Cabal Empire. Remaining forces make a stand in the Dreadnought but are put down by the Guardian. I appreciate this sort of foreshadowing. It's interesting that Rise of Iron largely has no foreshadowing and seems to come out of nowhere, while both Year 1 expansions were set up by ancillary campaign missions, and the Taken King was set up by the Dark Below. 3 Taken War quests take place on Earth, Venus, and Mars. Each of these campaigns feature an opening mission, a middle portion that occurs in patrol zones where the player is forced to complete a specific public event, which unlocks a second mission to close out the story. The The fourth quest is given by Petra and has the player travel between the 3 planets to kill taken champions in the public event. The Petra quest is largely unneeded and feels redundant, although later portions focus on Petra's grief and desire for revenge after the Taken War, which is an interesting and well-written perspective. I just wish she had been incorporated into one of the existing quest lines rather than being given her own redundant quest. To complete all 4 Taken War quests, the player needs to complete the Taken Corruption public event a minimum of 9 times across all 3 planets. The Earth quest also requires the player to kill all 3 of the Earth champions, which can only be summoned by killing 3 lieutenants during the public event. This is incredibly frustrating solo, as it involves waiting for the event to start, looking across a wide area for lieutenant spawns, and then killing all 3 before the Taken despawn. If completed successfully, the champion spawns. All of the Taken champions are fairly beefy bosses that the player must take down under a tight time restraint. This was likely easier when the Taken King was released, as you likely would have help from other players, but especially in the Cosmodrome, most of the players I encountered were incredibly underleveled and unable to help me with the champions. This meant that I had to solo them, which is pretty difficult. I wasted hours waiting around for events to start only to struggle to get the champion kill before I gave up and decided to play Rise of Iron instead. The Taken champions served as such a large roadblock that I wasn't able to solo any of them until I got Gallarhorn. Thus, the champion quests were some of the last content I completed for this video. Story content should never be gated behind public events because they're unreliable for solo players to complete, especially late in the content's lifecycle. I appreciated the Taken War Venus story missions the most, as they feature a guardian who's been lost in time for centuries in the Vault of Glass, being temporarily sent into the future due to a time anomaly caused by a Taken raid of the vault. It's a really cool concept. Each quest generally involves an echo of Oryx haunting the planet that the player must kill. I particularly liked the Mars missions, which feature the player fighting the echo in the Black Garden, and the Phobos station where the player first fought the Taken, providing a nice narrative rhyme to close out the Taken War. My favorite post-campaign mission is Dread Patrol, which features the player setting up a patrol zone in the Dreadnought. Before Dread Patrol, I had never thought about the process of setting up a patrol zone, but this mission shows exactly how it's done, which I thought was pretty cool. Immediately following the mission, the player unlocks the Dreadnought patrol zone. The mission features Cade talking the Guardian through the process. I love Cade's characterization as a goofy Guardian with the heart of gold. He's very present in the entire story of the Taken King and has numerous opportunities to mentor the Guardian. I love how sweet and earnest he is. The final story quest is called The Road to Kingsfall and is supposed to set up the raid, but I don't actually understand how the Summoning Circle mission actually connects to the story of the raid. It's possible I'm missing something obvious, but it feels like a bit of a storytelling failure that the connection to the raid, which I haven't yet played in D1 but have played many times in D2, isn't apparent. The Strike, the Sunless Cell, tells a much more compelling story than this mission. A rival of Oryx named Darkblade, who Oryx imprisoned on the Dreadnought to keep his grip on power, tries to escape from his prison so that he can take control of the Hive now that Oryx is gone. I especially enjoyed the boss fight, which takes place in a dusty and foggy environment, which has the effect of making Darkblade seemingly appear out of nowhere to attack the player. It ended up as one of my favorite strikes in Destiny 1 because the story was compelling and the gameplay was interesting. Overall, the Taken King is an expansion that feels like it's bursting at the seams with content. It serves to revitalize Destiny, and a lot of the praise I've seen is warranted, even if some of the content is variable in quality. Rise of Iron released on September 20th, 2016 as the final expansion for Destiny 1. It features 9 new story missions, a new patrol zone on Earth called the Plaguelands, 1 new strike, 3 remade versions of old strikes, a new social location called Fellwinter's Peak, a new raid, and new Crucible content. The story campaign begins with a cutscene featuring a monologue from Saladin reminiscing about the history of the Iron Lords, the precursors to modern Guardians who wielded the light to protect the last city from the forces of darkness. Saladin is one of few surviving Iron Lords and is haunted by the end of his brethren. He solemnly stands watch, waiting for the moment the forces that destroyed the Iron Lords return. I love Saladin because he always has a grave tone but a rich and deep voice. It's really nice to listen to. The monologue is interspersed with flashbacks to the final stand of the Iron Lords, showing that Saladin did not survive intentionally. He was spared by one of the other Iron Lords who sealed the chamber and detonated an explosive in an attempt to destroy the forces they were fighting. Saladin makes a comment that establishes the major theme of Rise of Iron: survival is not always victory. He feels guilty for surviving while his comrades died. The cutscene transitions to the modern day as Ghost explains that the House of Devils has had a resurgence in the Cosmodrome that Saladin has taken personally, deciding to oversee the operation to deal with them. I love the writing of this cutscene because it sets up an intriguing premise and mystery for the player to investigate over the course of the campaign. It also helps that Keith Ferguson delivers an incredibly emotional performance as Saladin. In a similar style to the Taken King, the first mission masterfully demonstrates a new enemy threat. The House of Devils has augmented themselves with a technology called SIVA that has caused them to mutate and evolve into cyborgs. Sepix Prime leads an assault on Fellwinter's Peak that the player must stop. Before the player can destroy Sepix, they get away and the House of Devils begins attacking the Cosmodrome. Saladin realizes that the Devils know where the source of SIVA is, which is a major threat to the city. I enjoyed the visuals of the first mission where the player climbs a snowy mountain in a gondola and is fairly exposed while they face SIVA Splicer Elixni. It was a nice change of pace because in Destiny 1 I found myself hiding behind cover a lot, and there's not a whole lot of cover in this part of the mission. The campaign continues with an introduction to the Plaguelands, which is an area directly adjacent to the Cosmodrome, cleverly accessed via holes the House of Devils has created in the wall. I appreciate the second mission taking the player back through the original location the Guardian was resurrected by Ghost to access the Plaguelands. It grounds the new additions to the Cosmodrome in pre-existing lore and locations, just like the narrative introduces the Iron Lords as having always existed just before the modern Vanguard. It also nicely ties into the themes of rebirth explored in the Taken King. The Rise of Iron campaign is only 5 missions long, which took me about an hour and 45 minutes to complete. It's shorter than the Taken King campaign, but feels more focused. Subsequent missions lead the player to the source of SIVA research, and the campaign ends where it began, the Rasputin bunker in the Plaguelands where the Iron Lords made their final stand. The player discovers that the Iron Lords were unable to take out SIVA, so they decide to finish the job, destroying the threat to the city at the source, so that the House of Devils can no longer create new SIVA splicers. The final mission provides a cool boss fight where the player fights remnants of Saladin's companions that have been twisted and distorted by SIVA over the course of hundreds of years. I love this concept for a final mission because it illustrates the horror of seeing your loved ones twisted and distorted by a dangerous technology. It also is resonant with the theme of cybernetics, illustrated in the SIVA augmentation of the House of Devils. Additionally, it shows the horror of what could have happened if we failed to defeat Oryx during the Taken War. After putting the Iron Lords to rest, the player must escape the complex before it self-destructs, which is an intense but short escape sequence reminiscent of the opening cutscene. The final mission is a perfect conclusion to the main campaign because it brings the themes and gameplay full circle. In a post-campaign cutscene, the Guardian returns the helm of one of Saladin's fallen comrades, which allows him to finally put his grief to rest. The writing, music, performance, and animation all climax in a touching moment where Saladin honors the player with an Iron Lord sword and swears the Guardian in as the first in a new generation of Iron Lords. It's a short and touching conclusion to an excellent campaign. An issue I noticed while playing the Taken King and Rise of Iron is with the way Destiny handles invisible enemies. I was born with a congenital lazy eye that thankfully was corrected surgically when I was 3 years old. When you have one eye that's significantly weaker than the other, the brain tends to tune out the signal and mostly rely on the stronger eye. As a result, my depth perception has always been pretty weak. Destiny renders invisible enemies with a distortion effect that requires the player to see that the background is distorted to locate the enemy. With my poor depth perception, I have a pretty difficult time seeing invisible enemies in this game, which is especially apparent in Destiny 1 compared to Destiny 2 because its graphics are worse. This is a major accessibility issue for me because I can't really see invisible vandals or taken minotaurs if they're far away, so my only way of locating them is by seeing where the projectiles they're firing at me are coming from. I'm not exactly sure how to fix this issue, except by ramping up the level of distortion distortion to make cloaked enemies easier to see. This is less of an issue for me in Destiny 2, but I still have trouble seeing cloaked enemies in that game too. Rise of Iron has significantly less post-campaign content than the Taken King, which leaves the SIVA Crisis feeling like a much smaller event than the Taken War. However, what post-campaign story content is present maintains a very high quality. There's a post-campaign mission that involves tracking House of Devil movements, where the player learns the devils are corralling Hive and trying to augment them with SIVA. This is a cool concept that honestly could have just been inserted into the middle of the campaign rather than post-campaign. It fits the themes and narrative nicely and shows how SIVA has changed the devils. It also is a little confusing that SIVA is still being used to augment the Hive after we've destroyed the source of SIVA. The quest ends with Rise of Iron's single new strike, where the player must take out the Splicer priest who's trying to control the Hive. It's a good strike that I've really enjoyed. I especially liked the boss fight where I realized I was going to have to fight the priest in an open room with limited cover while an experimental SIVA ogre who I wasn't able to directly damage stalked me. It was an intense boss fight with music that matched the tone perfectly, and honestly, one of the best in Destiny 1. Another post-campaign questline features the crafting of a new Gallarhorn, a rocket launcher that was once wielded by the Iron Lords. Gallarhorn is infamous for being the best weapon in Destiny 1, especially in vanilla, so it's nice that Bungie has added a quest to let every player obtain it easily. The quest features 2 story missions, one where the player travels to an abandoned part of the last city to obtain blueprints for the weapon, which is a cool setting because not much else of Destiny 1 takes place in the actual last city. Predictably, splicers raid the area in an attempt to invade the last city. The player fights them off in an intense sequence where you need to defend Ghost while he defuses SIVA bombs. After the first mission, the player travels to an abandoned part of the Cosmodrome to acquire the final pieces they need to craft a new Gallarhorn. Here, the player is forced to defend Ghost in a tiny area while an onslaught of SIVA splicers attack. I loved being forced to defend such small spaces in both missions because it increased the intensity of combat dramatically. There aren't very many places in Destiny 2 where I've ever felt truly as vulnerable as I did in the second mission. It's perfectly contrasted with the section afterwards, where the mission gives the player Gallarhorn with practically infinite ammo, which made me feel incredibly powerful as I took down another horde of devils. It's a perfect contrast of difficulty and power fantasy that leaves the player feeling accomplished while still getting to feel powerful and play with their new weapon. After the mission, Saladin declared my Guardian a Lady Guardian, a title which I didn't expect but was pleasantly surprised by. Being called a Lady Guardian is very gender affirming and made me feel pretty euphoric about my gender. I like my pink-haired Awoken Guardian that I played during these playthroughs of the campaigns and feel really good about her gender expression. It helped me feel good about my gender, which is something I appreciate as there are lots of games where there aren't options to play as a girl and I'm forced to just play as a guy, which isn't as fun for me. The final story mission to cover is the exotic Kvostov quest. The mission has the player craft an upgraded exotic version of the first weapon you ever use in Destiny. To obtain the exotic Kvostov, the player must defeat a SIVA captain who has the final piece the player needs to craft the exotic version. This fight was intense and actually pretty difficult, which made getting the exotic feel even more rewarding. The fight takes place in the same location that Ghost first directed the player to a Kvostov to defend themselves against the Fallen, which is a perfect full circle moment. After defeating the captain, Ghost leads the player to the exact spot where he revived you in the opening minutes of Destiny 1. Touching music plays while he monologues about how he's happy he chose you to be his guardian and thanks you for being such a good companion.
On the inside, I'd always known who you were, and that together, we could be something more. When you think about everything we've seen, everything we've done, I feel like I made the right choice.
This moment was so beautiful and perfect that it made me happy cry for a few minutes, something no other Destiny moment has ever been able to accomplish. North's performance here is phenomenal. The Kvostov quest is a perfect conclusion to Destiny 1, bringing the story full circle in a touching, emotional moment, just like the conclusion to the Rise of Iron main campaign. If the franchise had ended here, it would have been a perfect ending. I love Destiny 2, so I'm glad the series isn't over, but there's something incredible about the way Rise of Iron concludes Destiny 1. I hope the final shape will be able to match this level of resonance to conclude the first decade of Destiny. I'm extremely glad I revisited Destiny 1. The Taken King and Rise of Iron made the experience worth the dozens of hours of gameplay required. In review, I think Rise of Iron is my favorite expansion in Destiny 1 because it acts as a perfect and incredibly consistent final act to the first game. The Taken King is a close second, but its post-campaign content drags a bit too much for it to surpass Rise of Iron. Quantity is not always better than quality. After The Taken King comes House of Wolves, which was the real expansion that started Destiny 1's rebound from the lows of the vanilla launch. Finally, we have the vanilla campaign and the Dark Below, which are about on par with each other quality-wise, although I do slightly prefer the Dark Below because it gave us Eris. I think it's incredible that every Destiny 1 expansion improves upon the previous, which is something every game should aspire to do. If you've made it to the end of this large video, I would like to get your opinion. What do you think about the campaigns of Destiny 1? What are your favorite and least favorite moments? Also, let me know in the comments if you'd like to see me cover all of the Destiny 1 raids and lore, because that's something I'm thinking of doing. My name has been E4Me. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe. Thank you for watching.